Welcome to Third Angle. Today we're taking the hand of a robot that's changing lives. I'm your host, Paul Hames from industrial software company PTC. In this podcast, we share the moments where digital transforms physical and meet the brilliant minds behind some of the most innovative products around the world, each powered by PTC technology. We use a combination of our senses to communicate, but for someone who is deaf-blind, relying on these two senses isn't an option. In this episode, we meet Tatum Robotics, a Boston-based startup who are changing the lives of the deaf-blind community. They've developed the first collaborative, cloud-based robotic hand that can be a lifeline to those who cannot hear or see. This community relies on the remarkable ability to tactile sign. This requires a human signer to be present for any communication to take place. But their tabletop robotic hand can translate any virtual speech or text into tactile sign language without the signer needing to be physically present. We sent our producer, Kurt Nickish, to the Mass Robotics headquarters in Boston to meet Samantha Johnson, founder of Tatum Robotics.
My name is Samantha Johnson. I'm the founder of Tatum Robotics. Right now we are located at Mass Robotics, which is a robotics space based in Seaport, Boston, and which is a home to about 70 robotic startups in the area. We have about a team of 5, so we have a couple co-ops here, we have some full-time folks, and then about once or twice a week we have deaf-blind folks coming in and out too, doing some testing and validation. So we travel, we go to New York, Florida, DC to really get user feedback. Usually when we go to these testing, we set up kind of sitting just like we are, sort of kitty-cornered with the robot in the middle. And I try to describe, let them feel it. That's always the first step. They run their hands down the front, feel the buttons, understand what's in front of them. We were actually just in DC recently, and I tend to start by doing just sample sentences. The cat walked through the door. Simple sentences just so we can get an idea of, again, the signing speed they need, the grammar patterns they use, things like that. And for whatever reason, this woman I was working with, I randomly put in smelly cat, just trying to think of a short expression. And this woman started telling me about how she was born blind in one eye and deaf. And she got a surgery and recently lost vision in her other eye. So now she's completely deaf and completely blind, learning tactile signing. And I did smelly cat, and she basically started to cry there. She was sitting there talking about how her favorite show used to be Friends. When growing up, she could hear it and she could read the captions, and it was so exciting for her that she could get that moment back. So we started doing Friends quotes and doing all those things together, and it's an experience we get frequently of these people that are just so deprived of entertainment, of these technologies, that people really see how much of an impact this could have on them going forward. But the hardest part, and also the most exciting part, is that there are all of these things that need to fit together in a profile that is predefined. So we know that the hand itself needs to be the size and shape of a human hand, which limits our hardware, but also informs our software development in terms of how we're building out our trajectories and what needs to be integrated. It's a fun group because we have a very interdisciplinary team because of the hardware and software play that we have here. So we have software folks who are remote that are helping develop linguistics algorithms, the client for the robot itself, and then here in person we have all of our hardware folks really developing out the anthropomorphic robotics as well. What's been fun for me, so I started this as my master's thesis. And I started this because I was volunteering in the deafblind community at the time during COVID pandemic, when social distancing pretty much prevented deafblind people from accessing communication. And so I known to sign, but as I started building out this project, the scope just kept increasing. So as I started building a hand, and then I realized this whole linguistics element and brought on Nicole shortly after for that. And then I realized, we need to allow them a way to interact back. So we started bringing on this computer vision aspect. So it's been a fun project as it's continued to grow, as we start to see these needs come out of the testing that we're doing with deafblind folks. Yeah, so right now we're looking at a bit of a deconstructed hand, but you can see it's a tendon-driven system. We have 18 degrees of freedom, which again, it needs to have all of this dexterity in order to achieve the hand shapes of American Sign Language. So part of the design process was we started with 5 degrees of freedom. You know, you might just think of a traditional gripper, each finger can move in one way. And then we started adding in additional degrees of freedom as we weren't able to make different hand shapes. In that way, really making sure the design is as optimized as possible. We're not having any extra degrees of freedom. We're not paying for additional motors. We're really making sure that this is optimized specifically for signing. It's also minimized for grip force. So we don't want, whereas most robotics these days, you have very limited degrees of freedom, but really high grip force so we can pick things up. This is almost the opposite. We have a lot of degrees of freedom and minimal grip force so that it can't injure those deafblind folks. And so each finger has tendons routing through it, and that will allow it to bend in different patterns. And as it routes to a pulley so that the motor can spin and then configure those motions. It's difficult technology, and it's a small market. There's millions of deafblind folks, but it's always difficult to really bring assistive technology forward. But I think now is a great time to do it, because I think there now, where there wasn't 10 years ago, there is a focus on accessibility, and people are really understanding that the world is not set up for everybody right now, and how can we bridge that gap. And there have been previous projects developing fingerspelling hands or robotics for the deaf or deafblind community, mainly in academia, and nothing's ever gone through commercialization. So a lot of the work that we do here is really making sure that we bridge that gap. When I was doing this as my master's thesis, I was about to graduate, and the deafblind folks we were working with through the Deafblind Contact Center here in Boston were really encouraging me, you have to start a company with this, you need to commercialize it because you haven't helped us yet. Having this be a couple-year thesis project didn't benefit anybody. So really making sure that this makes it into their homes and takes it to that next level, ensuring that it's actually helping this community they've worked so hard for. We've worked so hard in really making sure that it has that impact. All right, so this is the hand all in a nice box. So we have an interface here, a button interface that is designed specifically for deafblind folks, actually based on how they use their microwaves. So if you can imagine microwaves nowadays, they're pretty flat on the outside, so it's hard to differentiate where the buttons are. So they use these, they almost look like what you put on the inside of a cabinet to prevent it from slamming. So in order to be like reference buttons. And each of these buttons have different topical feels, different textures, so that deafblind people can differentiate what each button is doing. And then there's the button interface here. So each of them, this first row here, are different applications. So we have stories. So these are stories that actually our linguist writes, and these are written in English, and then we translate them into kind of a tactile sign grammar to make sure that the language is accessible and the familiar. And so we have stories that Nicole writes that are things that people will find interesting. So it might be about people with disabilities who are swimmers in the Olympics, or about animals. We're teaching them about bees or the water cycle, and they can request content. We write things about that they might find interesting and really go off of their tune there. The next one is news. This one is the one that kind of inspired the whole project. So really making sure if there are important news updates, upcoming election information, they can access that there. Next one is the weather. That was actually really interesting of deafblind people. They leave the house and they don't know what the weather is outside. So this is helpful in allowing them, it's raining out, this is the temperature you can expect, this is how the temperature will change throughout the day, things like that. And then the last one is websites. So deafblind people can go on the internet, they can, pull a website that you and I can. Yes, so the way that deafblind people interact with it as it's signing, so as this demo right here, we're just sort of watching it, but deafblind folks actually hold from behind. So they hold right along the back with the tips of their fingers almost hitting the thumb here. And then as it signs, they're able to feel it bending. And they know what those forms sign. So if we click one of the application buttons, so it just signed the word story because I was going into the story app. So if I enter the application, It'll then start to ask me a tag, so what filters you're looking for, and it's very intuitive, and all of the apps work the exact same way. So the goal is, if you understand how story works, the same walkthrough process for news. So really just getting them comfortable with how to interact with the system. In this space right now, deafblind communications options are currently concentrated in like Braille tablets and human interpreters. So Braille tablets are a way to access a written or spoken language. So Braille is a medium of English, for example, here in the US, and there are a lot of technologies in that Braille space. However, only about 10% of deafblind people know Braille, either because they went blind later in life, or if they were born deafblind, they often have cognitive disabilities. So only about 10% of deafblind people actually know Braille. As a result, pretty much a large majority focus on these human interpreters, which can be very expensive. They have very long lead times, although extremely skilled and can really create that communication access. You can't have an interpreter with you all day, every day. And there are deafblind folks that live alone or maybe in homes that, need that access to what is the weather outside, what news is happening. Again, especially in times of pandemic, the news is essential to move forward. So there isn't a lot of technology in this space if you can't access Braille, which is why this is really filling that gap right now to allow people to use their primary conversational language, which is tactile sign, but in an independent way. So we're starting in the US and really making sure that the technology, we can validate it easily, because obviously we're here in Boston, we can test it with local folks, but we do have collaborators, as I mentioned, Canadian National Institute for the Blind. We're collaborating with Sense International India to understand that, okay, we're developing this hardware. Does this hardware work for other sign languages? So there's about 300 sign languages. And that's really the goal of what we're making, is making this be a flexible platform that the hand has as many degrees of freedom as needed to make robust hand shapes in not just American Sign Language. That's something we looked at very early, looking at, for example, French Sign, and making sure that this can still make those hand shapes. And understanding, for example, Indian Sign Language is a two-handed sign language. So how do deafblind people receive that, and how would they use our technology? So asking these questions early on, so we create this platform that is easily integratable with other languages.
My name is Nicole Rich. I am the lead linguist at Tatum Robotics. I also wear a couple other hats as well, like I do documentation, I do some basic teaching of ASL for our engineers here, and I do grant writing and a couple other tasks here and there. Here, my favorite days are definitely the ones where we have our deafblind folks come in. Getting to actually watch them interact with the technology and interacting with them personally and getting to know them on a personal, friendly level has been so rewarding. I write the content for what the robot's going to be spelling. So that's a tricky spot where I have to decide what people want to learn about and what they don't already know about, what they can learn, what's repetitive. So it's hard for one person to do all that, but I've done a lot of research with the deafblind community in Boston here specifically. What do they already know? What do they learn in school? What do they not learn in school? What do they know about celebrities that we take for granted knowing? What do we see online that they never see because they have to be really intentional about what information they do gather? I think the biggest misunderstanding is that tactile sign people think that it's simple. People often think that ASL is just sort of manually coded English, and that cannot be further from the truth. The fact that I've been working on ASL translation for 2 years, I think proves that. If it were simple, then it'd be over by now. But truly, and even assumptions about visual sign they don't carry over to tactile sign the same way. So you really have to have personal experience with the people that use the language as a primary language to understand it at all. A lot of people really think it's as simple as, if you know English, then you can just move your hands around and you can get to the sign, or that all signs look like the concept that they represent in English, like that the sign for tree looks like what an actual tree looks like, raising your hand to mimic the trunk and stuff like that. And that's true, but some other signs don't work like that at all. So it's a complicated language, not just a code. And I think that's one of the biggest understandings we encounter with non-signers, is that they assume that it must be simple.
I think that one of the biggest hurdles we face as a constant is showing the importance of bringing communication to the deafblind. I think a lot of people see the deafblind community and they might think there are 3 to 5 of them, but there are millions of these people that are completely isolated. And I think often we have to show that there's this need and also that we're solving the need correctly. I think often people think, well, can they use Morse code or something? And I don't know Morse code. You don't know Morse code. These deafblind people don't know Morse code either. So showing them that it's important that we support this community in the way that is accessible to them. Showing them that this way that we build this technology will allow for easier pickup for this. They can use it easily. They don't need to have 100 hours of training to learn a language they don't know. And that has really been the hurdle that we've been facing, is really just, again, that whole awareness of that this is an important issue and we're tackling it in a way that is not ableist. We're not pushing the hearing English majority into this community. We're really hoping to preserve the identity of the deafblind community and signing culture, but in a way that's just accessible for them.
That was Samantha Johnson from Tatum Robotics. This company is at the forefront of creating effective at-home communication tools to ensure that the deafblind community can have access to remote healthcare. Now it's time to meet our expert, John Hirschtick from PTC. John, Tatum Robotics follows an agile development approach, and that has included being a participant in PTC's Onshape startup program. We've spoken about Onshape before, but can you give our listeners an idea of what the startup program is and how Tatum Robotics has benefited from it?
The team at Tatum Robotics, they drive innovation by embracing agile product development, utilizing Onshape. Tatum Robotics uses Onshape for secure design sharing and collaboration, accelerating the development process, and ensuring control over access permissions. Tatum can now easily share a design with someone and then withdraw access just as quickly, which enables quicker and more secure design feedback from their whole community. Now, with our Onshape cloud-native architecture, Onshape is the perfect solution for hardware startups looking to be agile and innovate quickly. Founders and entrepreneurs can take advantage of our incredible Onshape startup program, where we're providing qualifying startups with free access to Onshape professional licenses and enhanced focused technical support. To apply, go to onshape.pro.startup and see if your startup is eligible for Onshape professional licenses for a year for free.
Thanks to John Hirschtick for his insight, Samantha Johnson for telling us all about Tatum's mission, and for Kurt for taking us behind the scenes at Mass Robotics. Please rate, review, and subscribe to our bi-weekly Third Angle episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts, and follow PTC on LinkedIn and X for future episodes. This is an 1860 production for PTC. Executive producer is Jackie Cook, sound design and editing by Clarissa Maycock, location recording by Kurt Nickish, and music by Rowan Bishop.